When you start learning a language, the most important thing, the building blocks of the language are kind of the sounds of the language. Everything you say is going to be built upon those sounds, and reading it's built upon those sounds. Everything's based on those sounds. So if at the beginning you don't build a foundation, pronouncing the sounds correctly, you're going to be setting yourself up for failure during the whole process. And that's kind of what happened with me, honestly. When I learned Chinese, I didn't put a big enough emphasis on the tones. I maybe didn't put a big enough emphasis on how to pronounce things. And I started to understand the language. I understood the grammar. I understood the structure of the language. But when I spoke, it still wasn't great pronunciation. And I think people could kind of understand me. They knew what I was trying to say, but it just came across as a thicker accent. And after building those bad habits of incorrect pronunciation, it really messed me up for the long run, because then after I'd already studied the language for years and years, I had to go back and fix those incorrect habits that I had created, which is a lot harder than if I just would have completely mastered it from the beginning. If you're starting a new language, don't be in a big hurry to learn a bunch of vocab, to just get in there and start speaking until you've laid the foundation. I am a big proponent of using the language after you get to a certain point and being able to communicate, but I would not say that you should go into it hastily. First, develop the foundation, especially pronunciation, and once that is done, then you can graduate on to using those sounds to produce the language and to communicate properly. So that would be my advice, is to make sure you do the sounds. So for example, with Mandarin Chinese, you should really master the four tones and neutral tone, how they sound, and be able to differentiate them. Because these are things used in the language to differentiate different words, and there will be a lot of miscommunications, and it will hinder your communication with a local speaker, with a native speaker. So being able to differentiate those tones, and then also being able to articulate the differences between the different pinyin spellings. So like maybe the difference between Z, J, and S, or those differences in how things are pronounced. Because if you're not able to do that, you're going to be speaking and it's just not going to sound right, and no one will understand what you're saying. So that would be my big suggestion, is make sure that all of these basic concepts you really solidify towards the beginning. And once they become solidified, then you can move on to speaking and forming sentences and talking to a native speaker and doing language practice, speaking practice. Because if you start to do it incorrectly, you're not going to build a correct foundation. And without a proper foundation, you're going to be setting yourself up to have to fix it later. It's much quicker to just get it done at the beginning. At the beginning, build those habits, and then later on, start to do the other things. Because if you're not speaking well, people won't understand you, and it will be harder to fix later. So that's kind of basic advice, but for those of you starting a language, maybe one especially different from English, maybe some Romance languages or European origin languages if you're a native English speaker. For those ones, you can maybe Russian a little bit quicker, but like Chinese, maybe Arabic, those ones that are quite different. Japanese, honestly, is pretty easy to pronounce for an English speaker. Japanese is not a hard language to pronounce. So maybe like Japanese, you could go a little bit quicker, but something like Chinese or Arabic, you really need to... Actually, French is pretty different than English, I think. So French, just these ones that have tough, difficult sounds to pronounce, you really need to learn those before you get too knees deep into the other parts of the language.